Hey everyone, it's Simon from Insider Divers, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about closed circuit diving, better known as rebreather diving. In our last few episodes where we talked about tech diving with our other insider Phil Christoff, we got quite a lot of questions to spend more time on rebreather diving, explain that fully. So with today's episode, we want to talk more about every aspect of rebreather diving. So I'm going to connect here with the dive shop in Gili where Phil works, Manta Dive, and we're going to make a connection now and we're going to start talking about rebreather diving. Hey Phil, how's it going?
Hey Simon, I'm doing all right. It's a nice sunny day here in Gili.
Is the weather good? The water's warm, all the usual things in Bali?
It's been very nice. We've had great viz, nice warm water, and it is rainy season now, but we don't get that much. We get a couple of showers here and there, so mostly sunny.
Have you been doing any rebreather diving recently?
I went rebreather diving yesterday.
How deep did you go?
It was a shallower one, about 25. We have a little tugboat wreck at one of our dive sites, so me and my friend Charlie went there and took some photos and messed around.
And how long did you stay underwater?
That dive was about 45 minutes, but I had some guys with me on single tanks that started running a bit low on air, so we moved up.
Not a problem you would have had on your rebreather, hey?
No, I could have been down there for a while.
So, we got together today to talk more about rebreather diving, and obviously you're the expert, but maybe you should introduce yourself again to our viewers.
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Phil Christoff, and I work out of Manta Dive on Gili Trawangan. I've been diving rebreathers since 2015, so I'm about 8 years in now. Became a rebreather instructor in 17 and a rebreather instructor trainer later in 2019. So I've had quite the opportunity to do a lot of tropical diving here, and then I've also gone and done some cave diving on the rebreather and traveled with it, and it's definitely my favorite way to dive. And so would you travel with it to any destination or just certain destinations? Ooh, anywhere I can take it, I will take it. If it would have to mean the logistics really get out of hand, then I might opt to leave it. Or maybe if I'm only going to do 1-2 dives. If I'm not going on a dedicated diving trip and I'm just going to hop in the water somewhere to check it out, I might just rely on, but in that case I probably won't bring a lot of gear at all. I'll just rely on whatever I can get my hands on locally.
Now, you lead a couple of our trips, namely Bikini Atoll and also Truck Lagoon. Are you taking rebreather setup on those? Yeah, well, we've so far I have the first trips I did on open circuit because I wanted to get a good look and see what the rebreather capabilities of the dive shops were. And as most of the guys I was with were also going to be on open circuit. And this year, I will be taking my rebreather for both trips. And we got quite a group of mixed open circuit and rebreather divers. In Truck Lagoon, I saw they have a nice setup. They have everything we need. So I'm really looking forward to experiencing that destination on closed circuit. Very good. So let's dive in. Tell us a little bit about what a rebreather actually is. All right. So what I was thinking we'd do here is we'll just kind of together start with the basics and kind of invent a rebreather. Because these things have been around for a very, very long time. The first rebreathers developed were obviously developed just for land, and then they were then moved down into the underwater world, where during the kind of 40s, 50s, 60s, in that time frame, you're looking more at like very, very trimmed down military units, and then it became something the diving public really started having access to a lot more recently. So we'll start off with the basic challenge, because the idea is pretty brilliant. Why
why keep taking a breath from a tank and then having those bubbles go away when you could potentially breathe in and out of a device and conserve all that gas? So the first step is you need something soft. So if we just had, say, if you imagine a glass bottle, you're not able to breathe in and out of that. So with a plastic bag like this, I have something that I could breathe in and out of, it expanding when I breathe out and then contracting again when I breathe in. So the first step was, okay, now I have something I can breathe in and out of that's not losing gas. But if I started doing that, I'm going to run into some trouble. So in not too much time, especially with a small flexible container like this, the oxygen levels would start going down because my body would metabolize the oxygen inside the bag, and I would start experiencing symptoms of hypoxia. So if you're going to have a closed circuit system, we need to find a way to add oxygen. So with all rebreather systems, these fully closed circuit, we have an oxygen tank. So we add that into the mix, and that uses a normal regulator, and we won't get into the very nitty-gritty of the addition system, but you have a tank that's your source of oxygen, and now we're adding O2 to the bag, so we've kind of solved our first problem. I can keep breathing, I don't have to worry that oxygen is going to get too low. The second challenge is a little bit bigger. So as my body's metabolism works, my body will produce carbon dioxide. Now, for most people, we don't really think too much of carbon dioxide in our daily lives. On the surface, if we start producing more of it, we just breathe heavier. So when you go for a run or a jog, say, you start breathing heavier. If you go for a full sprint, you breathe even heavier. And that change in your breathing pattern is tied to the carbon dioxide that you're producing. It's not that you need more oxygen, though of course you would exerting yourself, but it's the increased level of carbon dioxide that changes your breathing. Some of you who are experienced divers might have already touched on the topic of carbon dioxide underwater and having a buildup of that, and it can be quite nasty because under pressure, elevated levels of carbon dioxide will affect you a lot quicker, and you can get headaches and difficulty breathing, and you'll feel winded. So that's something we definitely want to avoid. So we need to get rid of that carbon dioxide. So we use a carbon dioxide filter. So in this little cup here, I have poured some softener lime. So it's these little white granules, and what they do when you breathe through them is they will absorb carbon dioxide. So now we have an element to this that can take the carbon dioxide out. Now, I can't just pour this stuff into the bag and then breathe in and out of the bag and it'll do its job. My breath needs to go through it from one end and come out the other end. You can think of it as a filter. So in real life, the size is pretty common size for a container. So this is a scrubber container. I have a scrim here that stops the granules from falling out. And then on the other side, there's another opening, smaller, but there's a scrim behind there that also stops them from falling out. And when I breathe, I need the gas to move, or my breath to move, in one direction. So I need it to, in this particular case, come in from this direction and come out from that direction. Okay? So with our scrubber material, now we have our filter. We've solved the problem of the carbon dioxide, but we've created a new problem for ourselves, which is now we need the gas in this device of ours to move in a circle. And that's where the circuit in closed circuit comes from. So we need our breath to go out in one direction and then come back in from another direction. And for most rebreathers out there, that's been solved with a rebreather loop. So I'm going to move this over to the side a little bit. So if you've ever seen a rebreather diver, very, very likely you've seen them one of these big, chunky breathing loops in their mouth. It's two big corrugated hoses. If you're wondering, the little rings on are just for weight, because this gets pretty positively buoyant because it handles quite a lot of air. And in the very middle, you have a mouthpiece here. And on each side of that mouthpiece is a little flapper valve. So when I breathe in on this particular loop, my inhale will come from this side and my exhale will come out on this side. So breathe in, it comes in here, and breathe out, it'll come out through here. Okay? That little flapper valve is exactly the same as you would have in a normal regulator. So when you breathe out, the bubbles go out. When you go to breathe in again, it seals and you don't pull water into the reg. So we have our oxygen addition. So we have our little oxygen supply. We have our carbon dioxide filter to get our carbon dioxide out. We have our loop that makes it all one direction. And then these elements, let's move that about there, connected together. Let me run out of space on this table. Connected together, then allow us to breathe through the system and not run into this trouble of carbon dioxide building up or oxygen getting reduced. So with these elements and a bit of shelling and other stuff, of course, to close the circuit, I could have a rebreather on the table that worked. But we arrive at kind of a new challenge here where I need to know how much oxygen is in the rebreather. So if I'm breathing around, I need to kind of have an idea of what oxygen levels I'm breathing. And if I have any plans on taking this machine underwater with me, it's very important because it relates to, same if you've been on a nitrox course, how much oxygen you're breathing affects how deep you can go and how long you can stay. So to solve that, we add in an oxygen sensor. So this little white thing that I'm holding in my hand, that's just the same kind of sensor you would expect to see in a nitrox analyzer. They might have a slightly different attachment point or be a little more sophisticated as far as their little microchips go, but the principle is the same. This little thing measures the level of oxygen that it's exposed to on its little semi-permeable membrane here. So somewhere inside the system, I need to add in this little oxygen sensor so that I can measure how much oxygen is in the rebreather. And connected to that, I'll need a dive computer or some kind of screen that shows me how much oxygen I'm using. So we've now kind of taken the step into adding electronics into our machine in one way or another, and because up until now, most of the stuff other than the absorbent isn't too sensitive to water. So just to recap where we're at, we have our flexible bag that allows us to breathe in and out of our little machine. We have our oxygen tank that's adding oxygen so we don't run low on that. We have our carbon dioxide scrubber that removes carbon dioxide for us. And to keep that gas moving in a straight line through that system, we have a loop with little valves that make sure that the breathing goes in one direction. We also have our oxygen sensor to help us measure how much oxygen is in the system. So for now, say that I'm sitting in this room, breathing off the system would function quite fine. But I'm going to run into a different problem when I try to take this underwater. So when I take it underwater, as I go down, my breath inside of that bag, because of the pressure, is going to compress. And there won't be enough gas inside of the bag for me to take a full breath. Now, I can't just keep adding oxygen, because if I make up the volume with the oxygen, then I'm going to run into oxygen toxicity issues. We know that pure oxygen, you can't really breathe deeper than 6 meters. So we need another gas. So we need to have a second tank. And we call this the diluent tank. For a lot of people in the beginning of the rebreather career, it's filled with air. In this case, It's got a little bit of trimix in it, a little orange sticker. So we're going to add that to the mix, and we call that the volume makeup gas. So that gas is going to be added to the rebreather as I go deeper so that I can maintain that volume inside of the breathing loop and breathe comfortably. So essentially now we have most of the elements we need. There are a few parts of the injection systems and information systems I haven't gone into any detail on, but the basics are there. We have our oxygen supply, we have our carbon dioxide scrubber, we have our flexible container that we can breathe in and out of, we have our one-way, we have our oxygen sensor, and we have our diluent. So I think I've made a good enough mess of this table now.
So that's a lot of stuff that's really quite different to, a normal recreational set. Are there any other differences that we need to point out that are different to your normal scuba diving rig?
Well, yes, these machines, to make them viable for underwater use and to get them to the point where they are with the safety today, they have quite a lot more advanced electronics in them. Most of them anyway. There are rebreather systems that go more minimalistic on the electronics. But yeah, a full rebreather setup runs somewhere in the territory of anywhere $7,000 to $10,000 as opposed to a full recreational setup that runs significantly less, varying quite a lot depending on what brand you choose.
That's a little difference. I mean, that's a big difference, but I'm guessing you're going to tell me we should still all do it. So let's say, what are the advantages of rebreather diving versus normal recreational diving? All
right. So I think you get the sense when it all started, a lot of people who got involved in the development of these, it was a fun engineering project for them. But as we started taking these things underwater and diving them, quite a few clear advantages started popping up. And one of the first things that you notice is because you're not producing any bubbles, so as you're breathing off the closed circuit rebreather, for the most part when you're swimming around on the bottom, there's zero bubbles around you. They operate very silently. For most people, if you haven't experienced it, if you've only dived and produced bubbles, you don't realize how loud they are. And if you go underwater on a rebreather and there's people breathing off of normal regulators near you, it's almost like a rainstorm is happening near you. Like you can really hear this noise. And that noise tends to irritate and scare off marine life. So one of the first things you notice when you do your first rebreather dive, I take people on rebreather dives, just a nice little 9-meter dive on one of our shallow reefs, is the fish kind of stop reacting to you the same way. The marine life swim a lot closer to you. You feel almost like you've become part of the reef. And that obviously also has its advantages for people with intentions to film or photograph marine life. So one huge advantage is just the ability to get close to marine life. All right, I'm just going to take some of this stuff off the table. Get these tanks back down to give us a little bit more space here. There we go. This guy can go as well. And bring up a little whiteboard. So what we're going to look at is when you're diving open circuit, what's going to happen is as you go deeper or shallower, the partial pressure of the oxygen you're breathing is going to change. So if we say open circuit, let's do a 30% nitrox. At 10 meters, your PO2 is going to be 0.6. At 20 meters, your PO2 will be 0.9. At 30 meters, you'll be down to 1.2. So a open circuit diver is diving a fixed percentage of oxygen, and they have a changing PO2 as they move up and down the water column. Now, a CCR diver, we set our rebreathers to a fixed PO2. So a rebreather diver will have a 1.2 PO2 regardless of his depth, which means it's like having a nitrox mixer on your back. Whatever depth you're at, you're going to have a good mix for. So a nitrox diver gets all the advantage when they're down here at 30 meters because they're in that territory of that high but not too high oxygen that reduces the nitrogen and allows them for a nice long no decompression limit or less deco. Well, the rebreather diver gets to enjoy that also at 20 meters and at 10 meters as they're coming shallower. So that means if you're diving on a no decompression dive, significantly extended no decompression limits. And if you're diving on decompression, it means you're getting a much more efficient ascent as you're doing your decompression than you would on open circuit, where a decompression diver does gas switches to continue to get the benefits of increasing the oxygen. So yeah, I'll put our 1.2, 1.2, and 1.2. So on top of the silence, you also get longer no decompression limits or less deco, and to some extent more efficiency in that. Because the closed circuit rebreather uses gas at a very slow rate, so provided that you're not dealing with any kind of buoyancy issues or you're not problem solving, just swimming along using the rebreather, that oxygen tank when it's full can last up to about 5 hours. And the scrubber container can last about 3 hours. So you have quite a lot of time underwater. You're not limited by your gas supply. You do have to carry extra tanks with you in case your rebreather breaks, and of course you need those tanks to be able to get you to the surface, but straight out of the box, your first rebreather dive, you can get more time underwater than you would be able to on a single tank setup. So time underwater and kind of the ability to adapt to situations. For example, if something were to go wrong, and the rebreather will give you extra time, provided that the thing that's gone wrong isn't the rebreather. A final thing, which seems small, but since you're rebreathing the gas, you're not breathing dry, compressed gas. You're rather breathing warm, humid air that's moving through the rebreather. So you lose less water as you're diving. So you get less dehydrated from it, and it's less irritating on the throat. So I often find if I'm going to be underwater for a very long time, being on a rebreather is a lot more comfortable.
So you have a lot of advantages in terms of usability and time you can spend down there. What about the cost? Because obviously the equipment is more expensive. What about your cost benefits versus recreational diving?
Well, I would say when it comes to this, closed circuit diving requires a lot more pre-dive. So when you're setting up your rebreather, when you're getting your rebreather ready for a dive and on the boat doing pre-dive checks, has to be a lot more in detail because you're truly diving a kind of complicated life support system. So understanding it well and maintaining it well takes a lot more importance than you'd kind of get the sense from a single tank setup. Post-dive cleanup is also something, and maintenance is also something that you need to work on a lot. And as the machine underwater, if we just look at the simple basics, so let's say that our single tank setup and our rebreather setup are both working the way they're supposed to be working. So we're just down there, we're just swimming around enjoying ourselves. A rebreather diver needs to always know his PO2, so he needs to be looking at his computer a lot more frequently than you would, say, do open circuit diving. The rebreather diver also has a little bit more of a buoyancy challenge because outside of the BCD, which of course we have one too, since we're breathing in and out of that flexible container, the gas is staying in the system. So your breathing is not affecting your buoyancy. So you really have to find your neutral buoyancy with your inflation, and changes in depth can be quite challenging from a buoyancy perspective. So when I talk to people who are interested in getting into rebreather diving, one of the big things I talk about is, are you going to be doing enough diving throughout the year to stay in practice? Because if you're only diving a few days a year, then the cost benefit for a rebreather doesn't really make much sense. You have to be somebody who wants to get underwater often enough that you're in practice so that you can enjoy diving the rebreather. The training is, of course, longer, but I love training and I love being a student. So the fact that I get to do a 1 week kind of complicated course with somebody is a bonus to me and not necessarily a detriment. But yeah, I would say your biggest hurdles other than price are it is a little bit more difficult to actually manage the buoyancy and dive, and it takes a very conscientious approach pre and post dive. And then, of course, looking at different potential failure modes for the rebreather, that's where things can get complicated as well. But sometimes I think that's where rebreathers get the wrong reputation. You can always get off the rebreather and go on to that backup tank that you have. We call it bailing out. There are a lot of very complicated problem-solving procedures that people have come up with to stay on and dive a machine that's not functioning correctly. But if we just simply compare them as two functioning units, the rebreather doesn't have to be that difficult to dive.
But you've mentioned a couple of differences, but what about, the cost differences, like the cost difference on your individual dive? I think if you're comparing recreational diving, swing on a normal air tank on your back, certainly that's cheaper. But on our trips, when we go to Truck or Bikini or other sort of technical destinations, when we're diving open circuit tech diving, isn't it true that actually rebreathers can save you some money, at least from the consumption cost that you have?
Yeah, so if we move on from the open circuit kind of more recreational space and look more at the open circuit technical space, what's been happening, I'm going to introduce this first. To do deep diving, you eventually get to a point where you need to start involving helium. And most people know of this as trimix diving. For many, it starts already at the level past 45 meters. There are still air courses to 55, but past that, you will be involving trimix. And anything deeper than 30 inside of a cave would, for example, require trimix as well. Now, the price of helium has gone way, way up over the last few years. And it's going to continue to rise as there's a finite supply of it. So if we take something a little bit more on the kind of tail end category and we look at doing a 100-meter dive, an open circuit diver might be spending $700 to $800 on gas, just on helium, to go and do that dive. A closed circuit diver's gas bill for that dive might be closer to, say, $60, $70. So if you're going to be doing a lot of dives like that, or in the category of more than like 15 of them, the rebreather all of a sudden seems like a better option. And I think it might be a point that attracts people to it, to one sense, that they want to have that it's a tool that allows you to do a lot of things. Like if you just want to swim around at 18 meters and get really close to beautiful fish, you can do that. But if you also want to be able to go to 45, 60, 70 meters and not have to pay high premiums for helium, but also enjoy all those benefits of warm, humid gas, getting close to marine life, and all that, the rebreather takes care of that too. And there's an element that's not mentioned as often, but there's just an X factor to it as well. When I take people on their first rebreather dive, there's an element to it that you can't explain until you try it. And try rebreather programs are available out there. So I would highly recommend, if it's something that interests you, have somebody take you in a pool or in the ocean, the certified instructor, and they can take you on like a rebreather DSD, where you get a chance to just experience what it's like to be underwater on one of these machines. Because there is an element to it that I think can't just simply be described.
I totally agree. I mean, I've done a rebreather, a trial dive, and then I asked if I could do some more. So this is before we met, Phil, but I'll do the full course with you eventually. But at the time,
why don't we schedule? You should pencil that in.
Yeah, we should. I mean, it's just a matter of time, because I will do it eventually. No, what I was going to say, I really appreciated the quiet, and it was just crazy how these fish were just swimming right in front of my eyes, not perceiving me as an animal, but perceiving me as as just an obstacle that they could swim around. So for me, the impression was really, really good. And if I would say that, as a photographer that I am, the appeal is that marine life just does not see you as a noisy element in their space. So a rebreather allows you to approach animals quietly and not disturb them, therefore getting closer to the animals and getting a more natural behavior that we can then capture. So that's for me the big appeal, which is why I'm very soon going to do the course with you, Phil.
Well, my first rebreather instructor told me right after I did the course, he's like, you can stop counting the dives you saw sharks on and start counting the dives you didn't. Because around here, you know, open circuit, there's a, depending on dive site, 50-50 shot maybe. Once you're on closed circuit, you tend to see them a lot more.
So in Gili, which doesn't have that many sharks, you're telling me that if you're diving rebreather, you see much more sharks?
We have quite a few. I mean, we have black tips in the shallows, white tips at more recreational depths, and then deeper we've located a dive site that has gray reefs, hammerheads in season, oceanic black tips. But if we look at open circuit versus closed circuit tech on that site with the deep sharks, you go on a closed circuit only dive and your chances of seeing the sharks seems to go up significantly.
Well, here's a big advantage for everyone. Now, look, we've talked about all the advantages. Shall we just look at some equipment? Because, you know, it is more than what we're used to with BCD and regulators. So why don't we have a look at how you put one of these things together, what the parts are, and maybe you can explain a few more things about the gear.
Yes, I'm gonna grab, I have just handy right here, a fully set up SF2 closed circuit rebreather. And then behind me, I have the elements. So as I show you guys this thing, I'm going to walk through and talk about where all the pieces go and what they do. So I know the front of it here looks quite cluttered. If we just fold this loop back, there is a, and we could do that. There's a harness. So typical, like you would have for a twin set or a single tank setup with a back plate. This is the waist strap and a crotch strap. We have a shoulder strap on each side, and in this particular case, an aluminum back plate. Additionally, what you'd have on the front, we can move the inflator out of the way. There's a gauge hanging down on each side for each of the tanks. So on the right-hand side, you have the gauge for the oxygen. On the left-hand side, you have the gauge for the diluent, which in this case is air. All right. You also have two of these hanging down, and these are called manual add buttons. So these are basically kind of like injector buttons for those two gases. So on each side, on the right-hand side, we have an oxygen one. So on this rebreather, we put two little green cable ties to indicate that it's O2. On the other side, it's the air. So that's the front of the unit. I'll fold the loop back down to hang down here, and then we'll kind of start doing our little x-ray game of looking inside of the machine. So, make sure it doesn't fall off the table. All right, so looking at the back here, we just see this sleek carbon fiber. So what's going on inside of that? Well, at the very bottom, we have our flexible container. So this thing right here is the counter lung, we call it. So when the diver breathes, this bellow moves up and down. And this is what allows that flexibility as you're underwater to breathe in and out of the unit comfortably. In the very bottom of that counter lung, there's a dry suit valve. So that means if there's too much gas in the rebreather and the counter lung fully expands, there's some way for that gas to get out. And it's also a way for you to push water out if you got a little bit of water in there. Now, at the top of the counter lung, we have a midsection. Now, in the midsection, there's a little elbow here where those buttons connect to. So when you send O2 or air into the rebreather, it'll just pop in through this elbow and come out underneath here. And then on the other side, you might see this little barrel. That's just the inside of a normal second stage. So when the lung compresses completely, it presses on a little lever, which functions just like a little purge button on a normal reg, and air will be added, or diluent will be added to the rebreather, so you can maintain a volume as you're descending. So this little piece here, which is pretty much all rebreathers that I've come in contact with have, we call an ADV, or an automatic diluent valve. So that allows diluent to be added automatically, and then this would be where your manual add connects. And that can be in a lot of different positions on different rebreathers. I have a separate counterlung to show you because this bellow style, or accordion looking one, is very specific, is specific to the SF2. You don't see it as much, so where are my other, there we go. Another type of counterlung would be these kind of soft counterlungs that would sit on the diver, that you would breathe in and out of, and it has its own attachment points to be attached to the loop. So if you're looking at a rebreather, if you're at a dive show, or if you're at a dive shop that has them, they can walk you through specifically on the units that they have what the design is. So one of the things you see quite a lot of difference is counterlungs can come in different shapes and sizes and also be located on different parts of the unit. So there's a lot of different areas they could be mounted to, and there are different ideas of why they should be put in different places. In this particular unit, having it in the bottom like this, especially with the dry suit valves, makes the unit very tolerant for flood recovery or any kind of water ingress because it collects in the bottom and can easily be forced out. So that's our first step there in the bottom. That takes up that space. If we then look at this second piece of carbon fiber, that is where the scrubber bucket sits. So this guy sits inside of here. Now, the way it's designed, inside of that carbon tube, there is a gap. So when you breathe out, the gas can move down the sides of the bucket, and then when you breathe in, it gets pulled back through the middle of the bucket. So your scrubber bucket, which holds the carbon dioxide absorbent material, sits there. When you breathe out, the gas moves down the side, and then when you breathe in, it gets pulled back up through. So most rebreather designs, there are a few that have split scrubber containers, but you'll see a lot of, especially back-mounted units, have scrubber containers that look quite similar to this one. It's a fat tube that you fill with the scrubber material, and most of them are rated to about 3 hours. So they get CE tested in Europe to about 180 minutes, and then some rebreather manufacturers have options for bigger ones for longer dives. So counterlung in the bottom with the midsection, and then we had our scrubber bucket. Now for the brains of the operation. Grab my loop. Top of the unit, we have the head. Okay, so I've taken, there's a protective plate that goes on here, but this is the piece that sits up there. All right, now there's a few different elements inside of the head of this rebreather. You see these 3 cables that we have here. Those 3 cables connect to 3 oxygen sensors. And those oxygen sensors, their output will then be displayed on the computer, or the handset, that is connected with a wire to that head. Now I know the brightness is probably a little low, but you might be able to see there. So currently it's saying 0.2, 0.2, 0.21. So these 3 cells are sitting in air and reading, and they're blinking red because underwater this would be considered a low PO2. Having it open like this on land, it's a normal PO2. Then, just to my right of that, we have a mechanism here that's called a solenoid. So all rebreathers don't have these. This is an electronic injection system for oxygen. So if I tell my little computer here that, okay, I want to go diving, you're going to start hearing, whoop, there we go. You're going to start hearing a little clicking noise. There we go. I think if I put it close to the mic, you can hear it. There we go. That clicking noise is the solenoid trying to inject oxygen into the machine. Now, I don't have it connected to a tank, so it's not sending any gas through. So I'm going to turn that function back off. So this would be your feature of what we call an electronically controlled rebreather. So a rebreather that has an electronic control of oxygen addition is an ECCR. The original ones that didn't have this were all what we call manual. So you had a way of seeing how much oxygen you had, but you had to manually supplement yourself. It wasn't done with the help of one of these solenoids. And there are still people today who choose to dive manual, and that's absolutely fine. This little compartment here is just a 9-volt battery that powers that solenoid. So brains of the operation also has a motherboard underneath the battery that's all connected to this primary handset. So as far as a lot of the investment in the unit, these are some of the more expensive parts. So counterling in the bottom, scrubber bucket in the middle, brains of the operation up top with our oxygen sensors linked to the computers. And then in my case specifically, I have a second computer linked that's up. This is called a NERD, a near eye remote display, that's right in front of my face when I'm diving, so I can always see, especially when I'm teaching, what my partial pressures are and what's going on inside of my machine. So that's a basic breakdown of one of the modern rebreathers that are out there on the market right now and what the separate elements of that is. All right, so we had our counterlung in the bottom with a midsection that allowed some gas connections, our scrubber bucket in the middle, and the brains of the operation, the head at the top. Now, if we look at the side of the unit here, it's similar on both ends. Down here, we have a first stage connected to our diluent tank, and with hoses going up, one of those hoses going to the wing here. Rebreather wings come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes, similar to, I mean, if you looked at them, a lot of them look similar to twin set wings with your inflator coming down the side there. So on each side, you have a regulator that connects your oxygen and your diluent into the unit. Hose routing is going to be very different depending on what machine it is you're looking at. So I've tried to keep this as general as possible for all of you out there that are looking at different units. I obviously have a big preference for this particular machine, but that's that's just me since it is my own. A note with this as far as traveling with one. So traveling with rebreathers, it can seem a bit daunting at first. People think, oh, well, they're so big and bulky. This thing, once you take the tanks off, slips into a bag and weighs about 21, 22 kilos and travels almost fully set up. You take the loop off, but the rest of it can be fully put together like this. For most of us rebreather divers, we don't travel with our tanks. So rather, when you go to locations, you expect them to have rebreather tanks there. And that's usually also combined with them having scrubber material there for you to use. So I would say if you're going to a place that doesn't cater to rebreather diving at all, where you would have to bring your own tanks, while the tanks may be a challenge, having to bring your own scrubber makes more of a difference weight-wise. And that's where I would maybe classify something as more of an expedition than a fun trip. But I do love expeditions and that kind of logistics. So trying to get through an airport with a 20-kilo tub of soft lime is in Indonesia. That was a fun experience I've had to do a couple of times. But yeah, so for the tanks, most dive shops you will go to will have tanks the tanks you need for your rebreather. So that's not an element that we normally travel with, at least if we're talking air travel. All right, I think those were the elements I wanted to say about this guy.
Wow, so it's really only 21 kilos. So I guess you can still travel with 2 normal suitcases and get everything with you, assuming you don't have a camera rig as well.
Oh, well, I sneak that into the hand luggage and pretend like it weighs 8 kilos.
Yeah, that's the usual trick. Exactly. Pretend it's not heavy. Just really concentrate on lifting it lightly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've done it many times.
Small 20-kilo bag that's going in the overhead.
Yeah. Hey, we've talked a lot about this SF2 that you have there, and obviously that's the classic style. But recently there have been a lot more side mount options out there that are obviously a completely different style. Do you also dive side mount rebreather?
The rebreather designs. We have our traditional back mount rebreathers like the one I just showed you now. And in my opinion, they are very comfortable to dive, and for most people it's a very, very good starting point. And then over the last years, not just side mount rebreathers have become more popular. Another thing that you see on the market is chest mounted rebreathers. Now, chest mounted rebreather has been around for a long time. Most military units were chest mounted, where you have a small pack that's basically hanging down the front. The counterlung and the scrubber bucket hang here, and then you use a single tank or a side mount setup to connect your tanks to it. On top of that, you have the Sidewinder unit now that could be kind of called no mount because you can fit it to different kind of tank styles. I have my personal experience so far has been with the SF2 side mount unit. So this will be the easiest one I think to explain, as it matches very much the back mount unit we just looked at. So I still have my counterlung down here, my scrubber bucket here, my head here, but this unit I would then wear mounted on the side of the body with a breathing loop that, rather than come from behind the head, goes like this. So that would go to my side. I got it with the intention of potentially doing some dual rebreather stuff. I think in the beginning, for most people, I would at least try a back mount unit first. Starting your rebreather diving, chest mount and side mount units, some of them are more in the category of, I say, beginner friendly, and others have been developed, the ones that are more on the side of like, this is a second rebreather to add to the back mount rebreather, can actually be a little harder to dive and set up. So it's important that you take that into consideration when it comes to like these different types of mounting systems. Here in Asia, we've been seeing a lot of chest-mounted units been working through lately, and I have nothing against those. They're great units. They're lightweight, but then they're separate from the BCD, like what the package I showed you earlier. So a side mount unit, you could argue, okay, so this unit is going to weigh less than the back mount unit that I showed you, but it also doesn't come with a BCD and regulators. So once you add the weight of the BCD and regulators, the units actually get pretty close to each other in weight. So from a travel perspective, the fact that the unit is a side mount unit or a chest mount unit doesn't necessarily mean that the total weight that you're going to need to bring with you is going to be significantly lower.
Okay, so we've got those options now as well. I think we need to also address the elephant in the room, which is risk. Rebreather diving has a reputation of obviously being a lot more technical. I don't think that we can deny that it's more technical, but also obviously you do hear that there are more accidents, or there are accidents and fatal ones as well. So talk us through the risks and the things to keep in mind when considering rebreather diving.
Oof. All right. So rebreather diving poses risks with relation to oxygen issues in a way that open circuit does not. So a rebreather diver could end up with a low O2 issue in something as shallow as a swimming pool. and end up in trouble. That's why oxygen monitoring is so important. And because pure oxygen is connected to the unit when you're out diving in the ocean, high oxygen could also become a problem. Because the unit scrubs CO2, you could also end up with CO2 issues in a way that you couldn't on open circuit. So all of these factors are risk factors that are nowhere near as severe to most open circuit recreational or tech divers. Now, that said, rebreather design and the development of the rebreathers over the last years, it's very much safety focused. So more reliable oxygen sensors, vibration alarms in case something needs to happen. The rebreathers are made to be smarter and smarter to make the likelihood of something happening lower and lower. It's not a replacement for good training. It's not a replacement for being in practice. It's not a replacement for getting experience before moving to the next level. I do think sometimes rebreather gets a bad rap because people go, it's the most dangerous form of diving. And granted, yeah, but at the same time, the people who do the most advanced and crazy projects that most of us would never touch, they're all using it as their tool of choice. So if somebody is going to do let's say push a very, very long, say 10, 15-hour cave dive, that's a huge risk. That's a big project to take upon yourself. You're spending a lot of time underwater. There's a lot of factors that need to be considered. Open versus closed circuit, most of the people nowadays would elect to do that on closed circuit. And so you see closed circuit rebreathers being used by the divers doing the most extreme stuff. So when you hear of rebreather diving deaths, and or diving deaths in general, I always try to filter out, if that was an activity that's so far beyond what I would consider safe to do, then I don't necessarily count that as something that I would worry would happen to me. If you stay well within your limits and dive and develop at a rate that's where you're taking your time, it doesn't have to be that dangerous. So I think there's a split association. If you're going to be doing 30-meter dives where you're filming sharks, or you're going to be doing some 45-meter wreck dives in Truck Lagoon, swimming around in this beautiful 40-meter viz, 28-degree water, enjoying that, that's very different than dropping on a 80-meter wreck in the Baltic in strong current with freezing water, where there are challenges there that for most divers they would just choose not to go ahead and do that. And the people who go and do those kind of dives, they know the risks they're taking. You don't get that far without knowing. That's not a risk that comes and surprises you. Same, I would say, with the people who do cave exploration. Those guys have been around long enough to know the risks they're taking.
So obviously, the risk is there, but it is a risky sport in general. And like you say, I think as many open circuit as closed circuit rebreather divers have accidents when looking at the marks that they reach. So say 100 meters and 120 meters or deep cave exploration. I think that makes probably statistically no difference at that level. But I guess the paramount thing is, and for, let's say, non-professionals that, a lot of us are, I guess a lot of it is training. So let's talk us through the training needs and also what you suggest to do after you finish your training.
Well, the base rebreather course, we call it just generally Mod 1. It depends a bit on what agency it's with, but you're looking at 6 to 7 days. You're looking at a minimum, I think, across the board of at least 7 dives, each of them being at least an hour long. You're looking at a lot of time in the beginning in confined, so in a pool or in pool-like conditions in the ocean, to just get yourself settled, get everything set up to your body, and getting a feel for the unit. And a lot of time in a classroom working through the maintenance, breaking down the unit, cleaning the unit, understanding what the different elements of the machine are. And then there's also added on top of that, the general dive theory, physiology, physics, and all that relate specifically to rebreather diving. And for the first course, I mean, first courses are some of the most exciting ones because that's when you have the steepest learning curve. So if you get somebody who's never dived a rebreather before, and in a week, they can be out there diving one, feeling comfortable, feeling confident, feeling like they're having a good time on them. And it's one of the courses I enjoy teaching the most because the fun factor for the student, even though it's a course and I'm throwing a lot of skills and other things at them, people tend to have once they've made that decision, they tend to have a very, very good time. I think you need to think very carefully before you sign up for the course, what instructor you would like to train you. And with rebreathers, the second thing to that is what unit is it you're going to start with. And I'm going to be a little honest here. Having been in that situation where I was somebody who had never dived a rebreather before, and I was taking my first step into it. It is a confusing place to be because everybody will tell you that their rebreather is amazing. And they will list a ton of features on their websites and tell you that they can do all these things that because you don't have that much experience diving rebreathers or any experience diving rebreathers, it's very hard to kind of sift through that information. I remember going on one website and seeing that there was like 23 different options for how I could order a unit from this one company. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know why I would want any of these. I mean, it makes sense to me now, like a few years in, but in the beginning, it is a bit of a confusing space. What you should remember is like most of these units that are out there right now on the market that are doing well, they're all good machines. And you can look at what you have access to locally and you can look around the world and you can make an informed decision. But it's also not it's not like you're locked into that machine for the rest of your life. Now, when you do get certified on a rebreather, that is the rebreather you're certified on. It's not a general certification. You can't just go and grab any different unit and dive that. But you can, after a while, if you decide to, you're like, okay, this one worked for me. It was a good tool for what I wanted to do, but maybe this machine over here, now that I know more about rebreathers, functions better. And you can make that transition. And usually that transition doesn't end up costing too much. You get rid of your old unit, get a new one. There is crossover training, so you don't have to do the full training again. So I would say don't stress too much in the beginning. Go out there, try one, have people show, like dive shows are great because you can look at 3-4 machines and talk to the people who make them. And whenever you're in a dive shop where there are rebreather divers are always happy to give you a little run through of the one they made the decision to buy and tell you what they like about it. But if you're going to really trust a rebreather diver, they should also tell you what they don't like about their machine.
Okay, well, I think my choice is going to be clear. Whatever you say is what I'm going to be diving. I think that's similar to some of the... Hey? Whenever I do it, yes. Can only be, brief. Well, we'll be soon. But no, I think an important point that I make when I talk to people about camera equipments, when I coach them on what to buy, is also consider who you're diving with. If you are learning from somebody who's on the system that you just presented us today, but your buddies back home are all diving on a different setup, well, then it's maybe worth considering finding somebody who can teach you on the kit, because in the end you have to dive with other people, and if your buddies are all on one system, it probably makes sense to be on the same system.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. If you're in an area, especially, it depends. There's a big distinction between people who dive locally and only dive when they travel. So if you're only diving when you leave your home country, you're flying out to, say, Southeast Asia, or you're going to Egypt or whatever, you're probably going to be hitting dive destinations that can accommodate a bigger variety. But if you're diving locally at home, if you already have 5-6 divers around you diving a unit, that also means that there's so many spare parts around, all of them won't be in the water at the same time likely. So, if you need something fixed on your machine, you can borrow something from somebody else's for it and save a dive. That does make a big difference. And you have, of course, you can mine these people around you for all the knowledge and their experience and what little things they've picked up, because most people make a little modification here or there. They have their harness a certain way or the way they carry their bailout. So you can learn a lot from people who've been diving the machine. So quite often that will be a big factor. What are your friends diving? What are people around you diving? Is there training available near you or in places that you want to go to? Is a big factor as well. But if you're reaching out to instructors, we're always happy to talk to people who are interested in rebreather diving. I'm always happy when somebody contacts me, whether they end up coming to me or not in the end. It's just nice to see more people getting into the sport. We're seeing a growing number of liveaboards and dive centers around the world catering to rebreather diving, and that's something that makes me really happy because I want to take that machine with me everywhere I go. So.
Cool. Well, look, I think this was really informative. You again stoked my interest and commitment to go and learn with you soon. I think there will be lots of questions from our viewers, so guys, pop them down in the comments. Phil will reply to them. Obviously, you can find Phil on social media. You can find us on social media. So there's many ways to contact us Insider Divers or Phil in particular. If you want to learn, I can strongly recommend go visit him in Gili. It's a beautiful place to dive, and he's got all the equipment to teach you how to rebreather dive. So I would like to thank you guys for your attention. But before we close, let's talk about some of the exciting trips that you are leading for Insider Divers this year.
Oh yeah, we are off to Bikini and Truck Lagoon this year. With Truck Lagoon, the group that's coming with me, our guests are going to be able to experience a lot of wreck diving over a nice week in beautiful Micronesia. The recreational side will be able to do 3 wreck dives a day, and the technical divers will be doing two dives a day as their bottom times are a little bit longer. And I'll be jumping back and forth diving a little bit with everybody, getting some nice videos and showing people the favorite spots that I have on the various wrecks. It's definitely my favorite destination, and with the groups we've gone with in the past, everybody's been so happy and enjoyed it so much, and the people there are lovely. So I am very pumped for that trip and very excited for the group we're bringing this year. So we got Truck Lagoon and Bikini coming up this year. Truck Lagoon, very excited to go back to after a little break happening after COVID. We got a great group going. There's some amazing wrecks. There's a mix of recreational and technical divers. So if you're recreationally certified, you can tag along on the trip. We still have spots on both sides of that table. The recreational divers do 3 dives a day, and the tech divers do 2 dives a day. So you get to see a lot of wrecks in that week that we spend there. Locals are lovely. The place is beautiful. It's one of my favorite trips. Then we're also off to Bikini just before, sorry, I can't say before Truck because it might be after Truck in the future. We're also off to Bikini, a very exciting wreck diving destination. One of the few places in the world you can dive a sunken aircraft carrier. It's a place where the U.S. Navy tested the resilience of their ships to a nuclear blast, and they all, of course, sunk, and will be lovely places for us to go and check out and dive. This trip is technical only, so for the Bikini trip, we will be a group mixed open circuit and closed circuit tech divers, as the dives will require decompression. For the truck trip, as I mentioned, it's both a recreational and technical trip.
Wow, well that's exciting stuff. I mean, we've been doing truck for many years. We did it together several times. I mean, to me, it's really one of the best places to dive in the world. If you like wrecks, it's warm water, it's clear. There's over 60 wrecks available there. So it doesn't matter if you are a tech diver or recreational diver. This is a great place to go, and Phil will take real good care of you. At least I'm going to make sure he does. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening in to this introduction to Rebreather. Thanks to you, Phil, for giving us the time and the insight and pulling out all the different equipment parts. I think it's really amazing. So everybody else, please subscribe to our channel and watch out for new content coming from me and Phil in the future.